Thank you so much. Well, we are so delighted that you're with us today. And, there are a handful of people in the Bay Area who are really concerned about and helpful to job seekers. And I am delighted that our speaker this morning is one of those people. Albert is a technology marketing and talent acquisition professional. He's working as a product manager at SAS. He's passionate about bringing attention to innovative technologies and standout professionals to generate revenues and job opportunities. He's the founder of Albert's Job Lists and Referrals, who has over 47,000 members on Facebook. He's a 2010 graduate of Santa Clara University and a native of the San Francisco Bay Area. We are delighted to have his knowledge and expertise today to talk about this subject. How can we systematize our job search given the economic uncertainty of the times? Please help me welcome Albert Chin.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, let's get going here. Go ahead and play from the start. All right, can everybody see what's on my screen? All right, cool. Welcome to How to Systematize Your Job Search During Uncertain Times. Thank you for joining me here on a Saturday morning to talk about this. It's especially pertinent given everything going on in the economy right now. And, one of the things that always comes to my mind when it comes to job hunting is how having a process and how having structure makes the entire experience a lot more palatable. And so we're going to go through a little bit of that today and have time for questions and maybe even some specific questions, I think, at the end. Marsha already did a really fantastic job of introducing me, so I'll go ahead and bypass this slide. And so here's some of the table of contents, right? We'll have the agenda here with really to start by talking about really where we are in the state of the job market, because that'll lay some context to why the market is where it's currently at. And it's not the full story, but they would say it's important enough to have enough of the story there to get what's going on. And then we'll talk about 4 different things that I think you can systematize into your job search. They include informational interviewing, building your personal brand, continuous learning and development, and mastering the interview, all of which can be really their own 30 to 40 slides that I've done in past presentations, but we'll try and summarize them. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A and some summarization towards the end. So let's first talk about the state of the job market, right? This is something that has been very topical since the spring when the layoffs really started happening. I remember in the beginning of the year when you'd hop on LinkedIn and you'd see like 400,000 jobs for recruiters. And now recruiters are the ones that are getting laid off and whatnot. And so what's really leading to the cause of all this, right? Everybody has heard for the last couple of months, inflation. And they're not wrong, right? We're at a point where inflation is at its highest in over 4 decades. It peaked in the mid-8s about a couple months ago, and it's been steadily dropping since then. I'm sure you're also all noticing that fuel prices have dropped a lot here in the Bay Area. I think I saw $4.05 a gallon out here in San Mateo the other day, which is really nice to see. And so inflation, as you know, is too much money chasing too few goods. The Federal Reserve printed out a lot of money during the pandemic. A lot of us got stimulus checks. The money was also printed to keep the economy afloat from crashing due to the pandemic. And on the other hand, we also had a shortage of many different items, supplies, things that we needed for our daily usage, right? We had a lot of people hoarding food too, and hoarding items at the grocery store. And now that things have opened up, everyone wants to go out and have these experiences. And so, and even in the labor market, for a long time, we had the Great Resignation going on here. And even in the leisure and hospitality space, we have a lot of open jobs, and now a lot of people in that space being able to make a lot more money because there's a shortage of workers, right? You walk anywhere around here, even in the Bay Area, you go to buy a restaurant and they're hiring people in the front, people in the back, cooks, et cetera, and so forth. And so with that in mind, right, what happened also during the pandemic was a hiring boom. A lot of companies saw that the demand for digital services and digital and technologies went through the roof. I myself am a beneficiary of some of this. I got myself a digital subscription to Peloton because I couldn't go to the gym anymore. I refinanced my home during the pandemic and used and did it all virtually. And so a lot of companies saw these things and they were like, you know what? Maybe this is going to become a permanent habit. And what happened was is that a lot of people realized, yes, I want to do things virtually, and those things that I want to do virtually are work. I want to be able to work from home, and I want to be able to live my life outside, where I can go to concerts, go to restaurants with friends, go and watch a sporting event, but I want to work from home. And so we're seeing a lot of layoffs for these companies and these services that provided experiences, a lot of experiences inside the house, but now that people want to go back outside the house, that experience is different. Um, and then the next piece is that we're seeing this shortage of products, right? The supply chain has been broken since the beginning of the pandemic because of what happened, with a lot of foreign countries like China having to go on COVID lockdown, and we're still seeing that. And so the Federal Reserve, knowing that inflation is here, has decided to raise interest rates so that there can be less demand. And so because money is more expensive, we're seeing a lot of startup funding drying up. We're seeing a lot of companies lay people off because capital is a lot more expensive. And the whole idea of punishing consumers, which personally I think is wrong, is to lower that level of demand, because when people are out of work, they're not spending money. When companies don't have that money to spend, that demand also goes down and things become cheaper in the longer run. What makes this unique as a recession is that we don't necessarily have that economic force occurring in that manner. And truthfully, uh, what truthfully, it's going to become more of an artificial recession than one that is caused by irrational exuberance like the one we saw during the 2008 recession, where you had a real estate crisis that took everything down. And so what else we're seeing as a result of these incidences is that things like moonshot projects, high risk ideas, are going to become less attractive because money now costs more. So during these last couple of years, we saw a lot of interesting ideas come to market. One that I'll cite, I think specifically, is flying cars. So I think the founder of Google founded a company called Kitty Hawk. And so this is out in Mountain View. And their idea was to develop flying cars. And because of higher interest rates and venture capitalists not wanting to invest money at those higher interest rates, that company actually shuttered earlier this year. And so you're going to see ideas like that go to the wayside in lieu of more practical ideas that we'll see during this time. The fourth thing of this impact in COVID-19 and inflation, I would say, that is not on this list, is there are also incidences where layoffs have happened because of things that have nothing to do with any of this. And this is what I guess I'll call the Elon Musk corollary, right? He's laid people off from Tesla because he didn't think that people should work remotely. He acquired Twitter and laid off half the company because the company also wasn't making money, but because he wanted to remake it in his own idea and image. And in those types of situations, while there's this understanding that there could be this level of fear, it's also important to note that sometimes people just want things the way that they want them, and there's no real economic indicator that you can point to that. And so with that in mind, right, this is the number of tech employees we've seen get let go since November 10th of this year. We saw that in December of last year, things were pretty quiet, and it really started to pick up during the spring and in the early part of the spring. Peloton started laying people off in February, and they've continuously laid people off. Some other names that we've seen in there have been Carvana, Meta, Twitter, Walmart, crypto.com, right? We're also in the middle of a crypto winter. And so if you own Bitcoin or any of these other cryptocurrencies, you've seen that the value of your investment has gone down also with everything going on too. And so, yeah, companies are laying off. They're letting people go for a variety of reasons. Each of these can point to either the fact that demand is lower or that inflation is high and the cost of doing business is higher. And so having all that talent may not make sense, or that they overhired during the pandemic, and here we are. And so I think it's been particularly interesting the last couple of months. And really November was, I think, the month where a lot of people started feeling that that the recession had officially arrived. I know the day that Meta laid off 11,000 people was really it felt really dark in the Bay Area, because Meta has never laid off anybody until now. And then the day Amazon announced that they were going to lay off 10,000 people was also something that was really interesting to see, because they've been growing so much, and now that number has gone up to 20,000 people. And so this is the lay of the land. Who even really knows what's going to happen next year? But I think these numbers are going to remain high, and we're going to see a lot of people in the workforce, and see what kind of opportunities arise from this, right? On the other side of things, one thing that I've seen in the news that points to a lot of hope around what's different is that when it comes to these economic downturns, what we see on the other hand is a lot of growth, right? Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, Snowflake, a lot of these technology companies that you see that are ubiquitous with technology today, all sprung out of the last recession in 2008. And so in terms of being able to reframe your thoughts and ideas, yes, it is a volatile time. It is a time of great retraction, but it's also a great time of great potential because of the ideas that can spring out of what we see now. So it's one way to look at it. So what are we looking into towards next year? I think that if you look at a lot of analyst projections right now, is that 2023 promises to be rocky. Next week, we're going to see the Fed raise interest rates another 50 basis points, along with another inflation report, the final one of the year. I read that market analysts expect a downturn, including rolling recessions across the world. No idea what that looks like, but it's going to definitely be interesting to see what happens as uncertainty reigns. Companies are going to continue cutting talent, and there are some companies that haven't yet to start. So one company that's notable is Google. Google has been especially mum, but they're starting to combine teams together. They're starting to look at contractors, and they're starting to look at a lot of these projects that don't make money, and who knows what will be on the chopping block. But as you know, they make their bread and butter from search and search engine marketing. And if small businesses and businesses in general stop running ads, then you're going to see that ripple effect go through their entire company. And on the other hand, I also think you're going to see jobs reports that tell a really interesting story. So I, being the job search geek that I am, go through the jobs reports from the 2008 and 2009 recession. And one thing that I always noted that was interesting during those times was that despite everything seeming to collapse, the one area that continued to grow during that time was healthcare. And I think healthcare will be also resilient during this time as well. And I also think that during this time, we're going to see a lot of leisure and hospitality do really well too, because of the aforementioned piece that I'm talking about with regards to people wanting experiences and spending a little bit of that extra cash on food and dining versus buying bigger assets like cars and homes. And so as a result, with all of this confluence of macroeconomic impact and digital transformation and changing consumer demand, the job search game has changed, right? So now we're seeing a familiar refrain from what we saw 12, 13 years ago, which is there's going to be a lot more employees chasing a lot fewer roles, which means that the job market is going to get more competitive. We're going to see that big companies right now are risky and are wondering what's next. So with the exception of Meta, I think every single FANG plus Microsoft plus the larger companies, they're noticing that their bigger projects aren't working out and that they overhired during the pandemic because they anticipated demand that never happened. And I say with the exception of Meta, because Meta has decided to go all in on the metaverse and virtual reality. And even though that loses the company over $1 billion a year, it is something that Mark Zuckerberg is doubling down and tripling down on. And I think he's going to try and make it work as much as it's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of people. The third piece is who you know and who knows you is more important than ever. So we're going to talk a little bit about networking today and informational interviewing and finding ways to stand out. It's back, right? Like during the last recession, we talked about how doing side projects and building your skills is incredibly important. And then finally, flexibility will make that come back. So being open to new and different opportunities, being open to new and different industries. For me, I worked at Oracle for the last 3 years before I was laid off in August. I had come to really love working in the HR and human capital management space. And I interviewed for a few brands in that area this last time around, but I didn't end up getting any offers in that arena. And so I had to be open. And so now I work in business analytics with SaaS. And so that's an important piece to keep in mind, is that if you try and you marry yourself to a particular idea, it may take you longer to find that job depending on where you stand in your situation. So we're going to talk about the first aspect of what you can do to help make your job search a lot easier. And that first piece is informational interviewing, right? And so understanding the basics of informational interviewing is that most of the jobs in this world are unlisted. Companies are always looking for people, but they may not always list their roles. They're listing the ones that have the greatest need, and those greatest need kind of roles for a smaller company are going to get 500 to 1,000 applications. For the ones at larger companies, you're going to see 2,000 to 3,000 applications. And so, one of the things we've talked about, even in really great job hunting times, is the annoyance of technology as it fits into this piece. We can all curse applicant tracking systems to death, but applicant tracking systems are here to stay. And the thing is unless you're really, really talented or you have a fantastically strong resume, playing the applicant tracking system game is going to be really difficult. And so at the end of the day, I like to go back to the axiom that people hire people, not robots. Not yet, at least, right? We all seen the emergence of Chat GPT and OpenAI and all these. If you've been on Facebook lately and noticed that people have changed their profile pictures to those artistic shots, right? That's the work of AI, taking art and going and evolving beyond that. But people right now, at least, they hire each other, and it's not robots doing that hire or having you go in and answering those questions. And yes, Ian, you said that you've gotten messages from robots, and I think that is an increasingly emerging piece of it when it comes to hiring, and you're going either by applying, you're going to hit that initial layer, that what I would call the gatekeeper, which will still be technology. And so by conducting informational interviews, by doing your networking, you're going to be able to bypass those means to be able to get to where you want to be next, which is talking to an actual human being. And so when you're actually talking to that human being, what matters, right? It's curiosity, it's energy, it's attitude, right? A lot of people at this time are probably feeling down. They're feeling dour about their prospects. But what's important is the ability to show that level of curiosity, that initiative, that insightfulness that is going to help you stand out among so many other people who merely want a job. So as roles become fewer in every single industry, getting in front of these decision makers will get you out of that traditional loop and get you into the front of the line. And, at the end of the day, it's not something you should feel guilty about, because if you have the power to do so and you have the resources and the means, you should always be able to take advantage of them. And so what does it mean to do a good informational interview? And what does it mean to be a good networker in general when it comes to speaking to someone? Number one, I would say overall, I would say it's having that level of focus. All of the things that I have here today in terms of my tips and tricks is predicated on knowing what you want. If you don't know what you want, then that's a completely different presentation. And it's also the recommendation that, you take on some coaching, do some thinking, do some reflection on what it is that you're strong at and what you want to do. I know Marsha's a career coach, so this is an ad for her in that sense. But, if you need that, then go for that. And so number one, it's to understand the company from a 50,000-foot view. If you're going into and you're looking for an opportunity, it's important to understand what they do. It's important to understand how the market is impacting them and how you might fit within that. It's important to understand industries and where they're going. So you not only have to be great at the skills that you work at, but you also have to be a fantastic analyst for where it is that you want to go in your life. Number three, it's reading the news and having that high level knowledge, both of what you do and what is being sought for within these particular industries. And then number four, knowing what's at stake, both here and within the actual job interview that is going to happen to you. And so as you ask for that informational interview, what is it that folks are looking for, right? Number one, focusing on your warm networks. So you're looking for people who have mutual friends with you, previous employers, alumni networks. If you've worked for, even if you're a new graduate, having that alumni network or even going into your high school network is helpful, because it means that you're going to be able to, it means that you're going to have that contextual introduction. You want to be able to network within that context, because if you're just networking for the sake of networking, you're not going to get for the results that you want. Number two, you ask for 20 minutes because it gives you enough time to ask for basic questions while respecting the time of other individuals. If you ask for an hour, if you ask for 30 minutes, or heck, even in today's digital age, if you're asking for coffee with someone, it's going to make it difficult, because time is of the essence, and people don't have as much time today as they maybe had like during the pandemic. So 20 minutes is enough time for introductions. It's enough time for you to ask for what you want. And it's also enough time for you to really go through your curiosity and ask the right questions. Number three, just like job interviewing, preparing your questions in advance will help, right? Even if you're informational interviewing or informational networking, you want to be able to know at the end what it is that you want out of it. Even if you don't get a job, you still want to be able to learn about the opportunity enough. Number four, and I know this might come in opposition to a lot of what people say, is don't come with a motive other than being curious and wanting to learn more. People may know that, yes, you want that job, but you have to hide it with saying that you want to learn more about the company and the potential opportunities. And that will be your motive at the end of the day. Because if you're qualified enough to get that job, or if you are somebody who does seem like they know a lot about the company, then that job offer will eventually be made. And that's something we'll talk about in a few slides. But overall, don't come with a motive. Come in with more of that interest around that you want to learn more about the company, learn more about that person, and maybe even understand how they were able to get in that company in the first place. And finally, don't expect anything to come out of it. I know that when it comes to job hunting, one of the things that you have to be that hunter mindset. But when it comes to an informational interview, the expectation is that you have that conversation, and you're kind of almost doing one of these choose your own adventure kind of activities where you may discover something here about yourself, you may discover something about the industry or the company, but overall, it's attention and respect that's being given at the end of the day. So how can you do some of this searching? I'm a fan of LinkedIn, and I'm a fan of their search feature. I use it all the time. And so when you look through this, you can go through and look for second degree connections, and you can filter down by various different areas, including connections of, locations. You can also look at people who went to specific schools, people who worked at specific companies, people who've even posted about things and have certain jobs. And so using this will really help you get to the bottom of things where you can have that opportunity to meet the right people and or even ask for that particular introduction. And so I definitely encourage the use of LinkedIn and all of its filters to really get to that point of informational interviewing. And asking for the introduction through a first degree connection for a second degree is always a lot better, because then you have that ability to ask and have that context, that conversation in context. And so if it goes right, you're going to be successful, right? Often a great conversation will lead to an opportunity, and it's always important to be gracious and open to what may come. So while you're having that conversation, if somebody understands that this is an informational interview, they might say, hey, we have some open roles on our site. If you see anything, or if you see something in my network that would be helpful, please let me know. And so in that situation, that's the green light for you to move into the next step. And of course, at the end of the day, always follow up. Thank people for their time. Thank people for their effort to meet you and do those 20 minutes with you, and then move, and then you'll be able to move forward. And it might be that when you have an informational interview, you don't necessarily have the opportunity to get that job in that company, and that's okay too. Sometimes building a new connection is all you need, because you never know who they may be connected to as well. So that's that. And so the next piece we're going to move on to is building your personal brand, right? We've heard a lot about personal branding over the last 13 to 14 years. I remember it being a very hot topic when I first graduated from school, when social networking and social media and LinkedIn were so very new. But I think that personal branding will make a comeback because of just the amount of content that we're seeing out there today and the importance of content marketing, right? One of the things that we're seeing over the last couple of months, especially with a lot of these layoffs, is people going on LinkedIn. The first thing that they've been laid off and announcing that they no longer have a job, and that it's been their final day at company ABC, and that they're looking for their next opportunity. And there are people who like, comment to expand reach, and some of these people have seen hundreds of thousands of likes on these posts, and they've been able to get their next opportunity that way. And so when it comes to thinking about that, I think if you build it, they will definitely come. And so what is your personal brand? Your personal brand is what other people know you for. It's kind of your reputation, right? It's sort of, in some sense, what I'm known for. People know me as Albert of Albert's List, and they also know me as a product marketer and somebody who works in tech. Your personal brand is also your knowledge, insights, interest, and personability. So if you're somebody who's helpful, those are kinds of things that people will know. If you're somebody that people go to for job search insight, that's also something that people will have a lot of insight around as well. And so your personal brand is also your personality. It's, again, something that people hire for at the end of the day when you make it to that job search round. So as much as you're filling out job applications through robots, or you're being reached out to by a robot, at the end of the day, you still need to talk to somebody, whether it's for the interview or to get to know the company a lot more. And then finally, it's how you show up that matters, right? So I know that early during this Great Resignation period, what ended up happening was we had a lot of people who would apply to a job, and then they got the job and they wouldn't show up. And now, with a glut of candidates on the market, showing up to that Zoom meeting 5 minutes early matters. Following up with others matters. Having a gracious attitude and sending that thank you note is going to be more important than ever. And even yes, Larry, like you just said here, your personal hobbies, that's also something as well. As a content and product marketer, one of my hobbies is collecting vintage ephemera, vintage paper roadmaps from 19 that are published between 1910 and 1950, as well as newspapers and magazines of notable and key events. And the reason why I enjoy collecting these items is because they show a different time in our civilization, but they're also really great examples of marketing from 50 to 100 years ago, 70 to 100 years ago, I should say, and a different time of how we wrote things down and how we promoted items to a particular audience. And so there are a lot of ways to get out there today. Um, and there's a lot of ways to really get your personal brand out. There's more options than ever, whether they're digital or in person. So everything from having a personal website or portfolio, which I always recommend. And, for me, a portfolio can be something as simple as a Google Drive, which is what I use, all the way out to a LinkedIn profile, TikTok, writing a blog. I noticed I wrote Medium and blogging twice, but there we go. In-person networking events, Clubhouse, and even volunteering and doing virtual events like this. And so once you find out what your personal brand is, you need to focus and accelerate. So figuring out where your audience is, engage with the intention of helping others, build your credibility in the market through insights, be bold and challenge the status quo, but of course, without being too risky, where maybe you lose yourself in getting an opportunity, and being your professional self, being helpful, following up, being gracious, somebody who is out there to serve others and be of use. And so you can get started with all of this afternoon. It's rainy outside, so you might as well, right? What else do you have to really do besides do that and find jobs, right? It can be recording a short video, putting that on YouTube and starting your own YouTube channel. We all have smartphones these days, so it's entirely possible. You can write a blog post about your industry and post that starting on Monday. You can reach out to people in your network and get that whole entire conversation started. You can build a targeted community. One thing that I did 9 years ago was start Albert's List for job seekers. And, you don't necessarily have to aim for 47,000 people. If you have 100 people in a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group focused on marketing or finance and so forth, that's a way to build a network and build credibility amongst others. You can volunteer. So if going to your local soup kitchen or helping others with their job search, or even going on Albert's List where people talk about looking for help with their resume, that's something where you can volunteer and show up consistently and build your personal brand. Or you can create a project that you can stand out with in your industry. And that project could be any of these prior 5 things that I mentioned on the list. All right, so with that in mind, we'll move into the next section, which is learning and development. And so when it comes to learning and development, this is a key piece because it allows you to keep your skills fresh. It allows you to keep your skills meaningful, and it allows you to continue to be relevant to employers. And so what does that involve? It involves knowing the economy and where it's going, and it also involves knowing where your industry is evolving. One of the things that I think is always relevant for one's job search and career these days is that change is the only constant that's happening. And it's true, because digital transformation plus these macroeconomic changes plus the rise of technology and changing customer demands means that how you reach your customers or how you do your work is going to change tremendously. And so having the right skills to match up with that is incredibly important for where things are going in the future. And so what you need to do is refresh and gain new skills for work, whether it's technology applications, whether it's understanding concepts around how work is done or how work gets done. It's networking regularly with professionals within your industry to understand what they're working on. Reading the news and understanding those developments. I know that's a common theme within this presentation, but staying up to date beyond the four corners of your room and your career is incredibly important for those insights. And then applying that kind of knowledge to your interviews, right? So even though you may not know how to do something within that specific realm, being able to apply that knowledge and show that you have the knowledge is really important for that level of success. And so what are some places where you can do this? There are both free and paid places. I think that two that I look at that are incredibly effective these days, one is LinkedIn Learning. So LinkedIn Learning you can get for free at your local library. I know I did this myself last week where I went to the local library here in San Mateo. I applied myself for a library card, and then you go on LinkedIn and they have a step-by-step process where you do it. Google also has some free courses, and Udemy you can spend a little bit of money on. They have sales all the time, so that's also a great place to go to find a course as well that you can take. And then in addition to that, you can go on YouTube, where you can find videos around your industry in your area. I'm getting into the data analytics space now, so I'm watching YouTube videos on how the analytics industry works, and so that's been incredibly important to my learning. And so you can also apply what you learned to your personal projects and take advantage of those sales on Udemy. And so, for example, with what I applied for my own personal projects, for Albert's List, we do a lot of events, for example. And those events come through a funnel where I use an email list, LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, and so forth to attract people to learn more about what I'm doing. And so I've applied that into a lot of the work that I do, because it helps me talk about marketing funnels. And it's actually helped me get a few job offers that way as well. And so with learning that in mind, we have the next piece, which is mastering the interview. And so I have an entire presentation on mastering the interview that itself is 43 slides, but I'm going to go ahead and distill this down to, I think, 3 or 4 slides so that we can get the gist of what I'm trying to talk about there. And so when I talk about job interviews, it's really 2 things in my mind. It's about mitigating risk, and it's about selling yourself as the best solution. And I divide that into 2 separate pieces around what I think people need to communicate when they're in an interview. Number 1 is to mitigate avenues of concern. Avenues of concern are things that will cost you from getting the job, whether it's answering a question such as, why did you leave your last opportunity, by maybe telling the entire truth, or talking about whether, or really having areas where maybe you show gaps in your attitude and your excitement for the role, or showcasing something that may not show that you have the best level of experience for that role. And so your ability to answer that question is really key, because it really showcases both your personality and your capabilities. And so a mitigating risk question that somebody may ask would be, what is your greatest weakness, right? We've all heard that question before. And we all know that answering that question involves talking about a weakness that you have, but also translating that weakness into a strength. And so being able to answer that question the correct way is incredibly key. The other aspect is selling yourself as the best solution is creating what I call avenues of excitement. Avenues of excitement are what really brings a smile to the hiring manager and allows them to dig deeper on what it is that you've done in the past. And actually, truthfully, avenues of concern and excitement are both ways where people will dig deeper into something. But you want avenues of concern to remain very shallow and avenues of excitement to get really deep, because avenues of excitement are situations where people will ask you questions about what you've done in the past, and they'll want to learn more, and they'll want to prod even more to your results and understand that what you've done is really amazing, and so amazing that they must hire you for that role. And so as you sell yourself as the best solution, it's a combination of your skills, your past experience, the positive traits about you as a candidate that are going to get you into the next round and into the offer stage. And so, like I said, what is mitigating risk? Companies are always looking for red flags, and they're going to be looking for even more red flags as as the market becomes more and more saturated. And in a competitive market, the red flags become bigger. So if you're showing up late to an interview, that's going to be a ding. If you show up and you're not wearing something professional, even over Zoom, that's going to be a ding. If you show up and it appears that you are and it shows up that you're unprepared for your interview, that's going to be something that gives you a ding too. So all of these things, all the small details that maybe we brushed aside due to the pandemic or because the economy was so good in the last 15 years, all of them are coming back, and it's going to be an interesting time to just see how all of those will come into play. On the other hand, how do you position yourself as the one? Well, number one, I always like to say, if you've made it this far into the interview where you're actually sitting across from a hiring manager, you're already there. And so all you need to do is perform and showcase that you know exactly what you need to do. Number two is that companies all have problems. Otherwise, these companies would be hiring for these positions in the first place. So one thing to note is that companies are in business to make a profit, and they're there to make money. And so usually they don't hire somebody. Usually they don't hire somebody unless they need that person. And so you are that person for that particular solution. Number three, it's to identify what's at stake for the business. And what's at stake is incredibly different for every single company and every single stakeholder within that company and outside of that company. So if you look at yourself and you think of yourself in the middle, what's at stake is different between your boss, your colleagues, the company that you work for, the industry, and other stakeholders and other peers who work with you in the organization. And so if you understand what's at stake for everybody that you work alongside with, and you're able to articulate those problems and present yourself as the solution, you're really going to stand out. And so how do you do that? You tell the stories that set you apart from others. You use the STAR method, which all of you should know if you've done an interviewing course before or an interviewing presentation, which is situation, task, action, and result. So being able to explain that in a concise and structured story is going to help you get to that next step. And then it's to discover what they're asking for, which you can figure out usually by identifying what's at stake and being insightful about the organization. And what that does in turn is it increases that avenue of excitement. It gets people to prod you more for stories and things that they might be interested in learning more about, and paints you as the ideal candidate. All right. And so how do you get actionable on your interviewing? Number one is that you create and prepare a document of questions and stories that you can tell. During my job search, I created, I anticipated my questions in advance, and I also awaited questions that were asked of me within the interview process, and I came up with those stories just to jog my memory, because whether you've been working for 3 years or whether you've been working for 30, you've done a lot of work. And it's important to be able to articulate those stories and tell them clearly enough where you're not fumbling and trying to remember what's relevant. Number two, it's brainstorm where you've been and where you're going, right? So if you look at your career as a career arc, kind of like a good movie, you want to be able to know what it is that you've been doing and how the next job can fit within the entire narrative of what you're trying to accomplish. Number three is to understand what's at stake. Every business is hiring for a reason, and they aren't just hiring just to hire. So if you understand sooner why they have that open role, it's going to make it a lot easier for you as you move through what you're doing. Be aware of how your stories create avenues of excitement and avenues of concern. It's important to increase the former and reduce the latter. So if you have stories of success that you can share, or if you know that you might have a red flag on you because you were laid off from your previous job, or you worked at a company that was unethical, you need to find a way to position that story in a way that makes you less of a risk, and look for ways that position you more as an exciting individual that this company wants to continue talking to. And the final fifth one is to practice your answers with a friend. One thing that we have always had is that on Albert's list over the pandemic here and even into now is if we've been doing mock interviews. So this is your invite to come and do that if you'd like. And so we've had almost 60 of them since the pandemic began, and they are great opportunities in what I like to describe as being able to get your stuff figured out in the practice field or in the gym before you go out in the real world and put the stuff into play out there, because it's always better to make mistakes when you're practicing as opposed to when it actually counts. And so with interviewing, one thing I wanted to also offer in terms of all of these 4 different tips was figuring out how to integrate the system, right? So in terms of putting it all together, a comprehensive and systematic job search is needed to survive a tough job market. It's like when you're working, or when you're working, you have to turn your job hunting actions into a habit. Waking up every day, hopping on LinkedIn, applying for jobs, getting yourself into conversations is incredibly essential and critical for being able to build that level of momentum. And it's understandable to have fears about where the economy is going, but you have to overcome. I don't have a screenshot of this, but for me, when it came to succeeding at my job search, it was like looking at my Google Calendar as if it was a Tetris board, and trying to fill in as many of those spaces and gaps as possible to get me there to where I wanted to go next. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and share with you what one of my weeks looked like, just to give you an idea of where things can go for you if you systematize it the correct way. So I'm going to show you this. Can you all see my screen? So this is the Google Calendar that I had about a week after I was laid off from Oracle, because I knew that it was coming, but also because I wanted to have as much opportunities that I had that was possible. So if you look at pretty much all of this, this is like a 30 to 35 interview week. I was completely exhausted after this, but this is the kind of effort that one needs to put in order to make this entire process work. This was my following week after, and then this was sort of the week after that. And so filling up your calendar with various levels of opportunities is going to help you get closer to the goal that you want of finding your next job. So yeah, that's what it looked like for me during that time. All right. So with that in mind, I have about 5 steps that I think of, 4 or 5 steps that I think about when it comes to looking for that next job. And so step 1 is what I call the first moments. And I've written about this a little bit on my group too. And so this is sort of distilling it. And so basically what you think about is when you're first laid off, when you're first don't have a job, it's almost like a pressure has been lifted from your shoulders. One thing you got to do is always take that deep breath, know that you're free, and review the severance package agreement and really look at what it is that might be next for you. Among that also is to take a few days to yourself. Losing your job is also always a really, really rough time. And so if you want to take that trip you've always taken, do that. If you have to jump back in the job market, do that as well. But take a few days to yourself, sleep in, go for a run, do things to get yourself back in the mindset that can help you feel sane again. And then ultimately file for unemployment. Step 2 is, and these are some of the pieces that you're going to see in terms of what we just reviewed, is to build out your infrastructure. I call this your job search infrastructure, your job search fabric, because it helps you build the base of what is going to help make your job search strong. So number one is to announce that you're available and to begin to build your brand. For me, because I already had Albert's list, I went ahead and posted in my group. I was able to actually get my job at SAS through an Albert's list referral. And so anyone who may be in my group and saw that post saw that I got like 600 reactions and almost 200 comments, and it did help me get a few interviews as well. And so that was really helpful for me because it made my job search a whole lot easier. Start building new habits to get into that job search. So if you need to wake up and do a prayer every morning and ask God for opportunities, do that. If you need to read something positive to get you into a good mood, do that. If having breakfast and going for a walk is something that you have to do, that's also a really good habit as well. Something that gets you back into that sync of things. Number three is to update your LinkedIn, your portfolio, sign up for LinkedIn Premium, anything that you need to get that credibility aspect back so that you have you have something out there and that people can search for you, right? You can turn on the open to work feature. You can turn on the feature that allows recruiters to see what opportunities you're hiring for and so forth. Number three is to start placing your resume on job search sites. So this is where I call about going on offense, where it's like going to a career builder or an indeed.com or a ZipRecruiter and putting your resume out there so that you can have those conversations with the right people. And then number five, find accountability partners and support systems. So whether these are your friends, whether this is, we have a job search chat group on a job search accountability group within our Facebook group on Albert's List. These are places where you can go and meet people who are in similar situations as you, or people who know you well to hold you accountable so that you can turn job hunting into a consistent and actionable process that gives you the results and steps that you want. And then step three is to ultimately get on offense, right? So it's to apply for jobs, reach out for informational interviews, and start reaching out and talking to people. Number two, it's to check your morale at the door. One of the things that really sucks about losing your job or being jobless is sometimes it can become an attitude issue. I know that when I left Oracle, it felt really harrowing because of all the uncertainty that it was felt a couple of months before. They didn't communicate the layoffs very well or at all. And there was just not a lot of communication coming down. And so as I was leaving my job, I was just thinking, wow, this feels terrible. And also my skills came into question. And so I was taking interviews and job opportunities where my salary would have been lower. And so you need to check your morale at the door because sometimes you get bogged down by all the smaller details of what's going on with regards to the economy, with regards to you. And so if you need to meet with your accountability group and make sure that your morale is high, do that. Go to networking events and meeting others, right? So staying at home and hunting for work all day can be a very isolating experience. So whether it's virtual, whether it's in person, you want to be amidst all of these various different communities so that you can find yourself in a better spot. Build your personal brand and share insights about your industry multiple times a week. So if that's going on LinkedIn and writing a post and using the right hashtags to get yourself out there, that's one thing. If it's building a YouTube channel, a TikTok, learning new technologies to really put yourself out there, then that's another thing. So building that personal brand. Continuing to practice that level of accountability, as we mentioned, checking in, how many jobs did you apply for that day and so forth. And then filling up your calendar with interviews. So if, just like you saw, if you're filling up your calendar, if you're having that momentum, you're going to get to your next job faster. Yep. Ian's got it right. The 5-3-1 rule, 5 reactions, 3 comments, and 1 post. I like it. And then step 4 is to perfect your defense. So going on defense is preserving your mental health. It's integrating learning into your day and focusing on yourself so that you can be the strongest version of you. Building a meaningful side project from learning your skills that you've been on offense. Following up with opportunities as they come into your inbox and not waiting on them. So, making the phone calls, sitting making sure that you have followed up, making sure that you're networking, and then being prepared for anything to come your way, right? Because the job market can move fast. Even though there might be lots and lots of applicants, if you can move fast and you can find those next opportunities, then great and fantastic things can happen. And then step 5, repeat it until you get that job. And so one caveat to that is, the job search can get pretty tiring. And so I do encourage you to take breaks if you need to. I do encourage you to take a few days off, treasure your weekends if you must, so that you can have more energy to hop into it when you're able to. And so with some next steps, I know we've talked about it already. We've talked about all these various tips, right? We talked about informational interviewing, learning and development, going out and mastering the job interview, and then being able to create the step-by-step process. What are some of the next steps that you can take to really put these into play and apply them? So number 1, I invite all of you on this community here to join Albert's List. We have 47,000 recruiters, job seekers, hiring managers, coaches, and more. I encourage you to get active and give advice, discover jobs, get referred, or network with others. And there's lots and lots of opportunities to do that. I also invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email if you have any questions or if you want a copy of this presentation and so forth. And so with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to this presentation today and spending some of your Saturday with me. Happy to answer any questions or whatever the next steps are with today's programming. Thank you so much, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Does anybody have a question? We've got just a few minutes before we need to start announcements. Anybody have a question they'd like to see Albert address before we do that? All right, here's one. Share how I might present what looks like a gap to hiring managers in my employment history. On my resume, I show having my own business that I started in 2016 that's loosely related to what I'm looking for, but recruiters seem to see it as a negative.
So I think I'd like to know how recruiters see that business as a negative and how that business relates back to what it is that you do at work. I always think that when it comes to interviewing, that it is about how you position what it is that you do and looking at those transferable skills that matter into that job as well. And so I think that in addition to that, the idea of a gap these days is not necessarily as negative as it used to be, especially if that gap happened during the pandemic, because a lot of people were caring for the sick or they were sick themselves, and a lot was just going on. I would say that, if you can be more specific about your business and what it is that you do for work, that might help me answer that question a lot more effectively too.
And I think it's fair to say that if you put a self-employment thing, that you ought to be able to tell stories about the difference you made in that company, right? That it isn't made up, it is real, and you had a real impact with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I like Ian's comments here, comparing the pandemic to the MCU. Yeah.
So how would you handle an extended period of not working, like childcare or elder care, 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, so I think the same applicable skill set is something that we can tell a story about with regards to that, because you learn, you definitely have those transferable skills that you can speak to, and so you're managing people, you're managing projects. I think that if you can speak to that, then that helps. Maybe in the next 10 to 15 years, you've done some volunteer work or you've done some side project work that you can also speak to. So if those are things that you can also address, I think that would be helpful too.
All right, so George, who'd asked the earlier question, came back with, he's a project manager in IT. In his business, he helps others start businesses and add and manage their business tools.
Oh, so I mean, I would say that that's very applicable. There's a lot of cross transferable skills in that regard. And
But do,
so
do employers, are they concerned that if you are capable of doing an independent self-employment that you won't want to work for them for long?
I think that's definitely something that that recruiters think about. I think that it's also important to talk about why the business that you started didn't end up working, if that's the case. Because sometimes it's just the state of the economy or the amount of clients that you could get or other extenuating circumstances such as bills, rent, health issues that may require you to go and work for another employer instead. So um, I see that the dual job could be considered an avenue of concern. And so you can alleviate that by talking about the skills that you picked up from working in that job while also talking about why the business is something you no longer do, and how you'd be committed to working at that company no matter what. Yeah.
Delilah asked, what would be a good story for a layoff? Some recruiters can see this as a negative too.
I think if you're in tech and you're a recruiter and you don't understand and you don't understand a layoff, then I don't know what you're doing in recruiting. Because layoffs are sort of this like badge of honor, welcome to the club, especially in the Bay Area. If you haven't been laid off yet, then you're either own your own company or you know the owner of the company, or you're just incredibly, incredibly lucky. Um, Right. And especially if you're somebody who's been working the last like year and a half with 2, 3 years with all these layoffs. If that's something that a recruiter doesn't get, then I would just move on to the next opportunity. I would not feel guilty about it.
I think there are companies that use layoffs as a way to get rid of their poor performers.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so there are layoffs that are whole groups. So there are probably details that you can add to that show that it was not aimed at you for your
You always
performance.
focus on the business side in that regard, where you say that, we've been in a volatile macroeconomic environment, and the company looked at the numbers and they decided to move in a different direction. And it just happened to be in a business unit that they looked at that needed to move in a different direction. And so I was impacted by a layoff. And that's why I'm looking for new opportunities.
All right, awesome.
Oh yeah, so you were a top 10% in your latest performance review. So it might have just been an infrastructure thing more than it was about you. And so I definitely think it's not your fault. And if a recruiter tries to make it your fault, then that might not be a company you want to work for in the first place. So
Well said. All right, let's pause here and do our announcements, and then we'll bring Albert back up for more questions. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Once more, a round of applause for Albert.